Xuan Yuan Sword 7 is a part of one of the oldest Chinese RPG series. In fact, it may well be the oldest, with 13 titles. It started back in 1990 and was developed by SoftStar. Now, the 7th game in the series is arriving on the Nintendo Switch, and don't worry, you don't need to have ever played one of them to understand the storyline, but this one was co-developed by SoftStar and Domo Studio, and it's an action RPG with quite a deep storyline. As we approach the twilight of the Nintendo Switch, it's interesting to see how some of these more difficult ports have turned out. Is this one going to take you to Elysium, or is this one you're going to want to miss? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now, let's find out. The story centers around Taishi Zhao. He's an instantly likable protagonist and a swordsman whose only real goal is to protect his sister. The game begins with both characters at a young age, and it's not long before things take a dark turn and your sister is mortally wounded. Zhao takes it upon himself to save her. He uses a scroll to take them to Elysium and there enlists the help of a powerful being to try and save her life. In exchange for freeing him, he agrees to help you, but in the meantime he rips your sister's soul from her body and leaves her basically as a ghost. Now, slightly comically, she seems quite delighted by this as she's been suffering from an illness, but the whole game will see you gradually pushing towards that end goal of restoring her back to herself. She joins you on your adventure in a few different forms, and there are other side stories, but this is a game that wants to focus predominantly on its main storyline. Now, that is important because although it does feature some side activities, they're not as fleshed out as some of the game's contemporaries. To its credit though, it really does tell its story well. All of the characters are voice acted, there are many different cutscenes, sometimes dialogue choices, but if you're someone that likes a solid story in an RPG, I was really surprised by how well it was handled here.
没事的，阿雄一定会把你救回来，不计代价。
It really plays with your emotions, and certainly has some shocks that I won't spoil. On the flip side of the narrative is it can feel quite linear. For a semi-open world RPG, I always find myself going off the beaten path in some games, and here that's not really a viable option. There's nothing to go and see. Now, the gameplay is split into a few different areas. You've got your combat. Now, this is an action RPG after all, and Taishi Zhao is joined by a few different helpers. These side characters will also join in, and you can actually activate moves that they perform on the enemies. You can lock on, there's the old classic, a dodge move, blocking at just the right time to activate a parry, and the combat is instantly gratifying. I do personally enjoy a stamina system, which is something this game has, but I want to be able to quickly switch between enemies, string off a number of attacks, evade, dodge in and out of damage, and then maybe perform some heavy attacks before perhaps executing the enemy. I don't ask a lot, and Xuan Yuan certainly delivers in those areas. Rather than have different weapons that you equip, you have different stances that are unlocked throughout the story, such as the bear stance with new moves, powerful attacks, with certain stances having their own powerful special moves that do massive damage and can eventually stagger the enemy using the old classic, a poise bar located below their health. And as far as those enemies go, well, you're looking at around about 40, although there are some repeats of the same. Reskins, if you will, the fiery version of the wolf at the start, or the more haggard, hag. It can mean you end up fighting the same types of enemies quite often, but it didn't detract too much from my enjoyment of the combat because the single button stance switch and the different spells and abilities, they're so easy to use that it's just fun combat. Surprisingly so, it's also not too easy, requiring you to use items and potions on the fly, and certainly some of the more tricky bosses took myself an embarrassing number of attempts, but rather than have to go back to a save point, you can simply hit retry and jump once more into the fray. Some enemies will have stun attacks which were a little irritating. In conjunction with the visual quality, sometimes it just felt a little difficult to tell when you were stunned, and there's a bit of clipping on some environmental objects. It can just affect the controls, which is something you really don't want in a tight, fast-paced action RPG. Now, this is semi-open world as mentioned. There's a map that you can see the overall region, there's a fast travel system, whereby you unlock different shrines and can fast travel between them. Again, I think it would have been much better to not have to visit these shrines to move between. It should have been once you have unlocked one, you can simply go back to it whenever you want. For me, that makes more sense. But you'll also find manual save points in the form of different shrines, as well as campfires that allow you to rest. Now, the semi-open world nature isn't helped by the fact there's no minimap. It really makes no sense to me. There is even a detail view map that you can access by pressing minus, and shrinking that down and sticking it in the corner of the screen would have been perfect. The reason it was an issue for me is, yes, it is only semi-open world and there are some massive areas that you can move between, but by not having the minimap in the corner, I wasn't really inclined to go anywhere other than the waypoints. And the waypoints are so evident that you do tend to just follow those from one to the next. It's difficult to articulate, but what I'm trying to say is it doesn't make you want to explore. And that's a shame because, you know, there are the occasional hidden items in vases or unique items in chests. But by not having that image in my head of where I am in relation to anything else, it made it feel more linear than it was. Now, the towns dotted around the place have a few different amenities. Things like a shop where you can buy and sell goods. Some crafting components will need to be purchased, and that's probably a good time to look at character management and leveling. Now, you can apply different skins to your character, but you won't be necessarily acquiring new weapons. Instead, you'll be crafting new additions for your current one, be it a new hilt or a sharper blade. Now, I actually like that. It makes sense. Rather than having weapons, you've got stances, and by gathering up different ingredients from the world, be it through combat or finding those hidden ones, you can then unlock several buildings. One of these will be about crafting weapons, one your armor, and there's also a reasonably interesting fusing system where you'll choose 2 random ingredients, fuse them together to create these soul upgrades you can apply to each of the different characters in your party. Aside from that though, the crafting system's a little bare bones, but thankfully you don't have to go anywhere to do that. You can access that whenever you want. Finally then, you've got how you move around the world. Now, while there's not really a run button, there are certain locations where you'll move more quickly. With that said, I would have really liked a run button. I'm someone that, for whatever reason, I like to just be able to sprint. Even if it took some of my stamina, I needed to move a little bit faster. There are also some platforming sections. They're the classic painted white edges where you press a button, you'll jump up onto that ledge, and then you just hold a direction and it will manually jump. These are fine, they add a little bit of variety, but they're by no means the bread and butter of the game. There are a couple of side games, a variation of chess where you challenge the best people in the land. That's actually really quite fun. And some parts of the story will see you entering Xuan Yuan's equivalent of a Zelda dungeon, with a few little puzzles in there as well, interspersed between the combat. These are really well done, and they took me by surprise, honestly. I think that's really the whole game in a nutshell. It took me by surprise. The story was far better than I thought it would be. It really does hit the emotional feels at times, and yes, it does go on a little bit, but that's almost part and parcel for this genre. And although you make decisions, there's no real choice. But the combat was also very good. With a little refinement, this could have been a real great. And I give story and gameplay combined 16 out of 20. The controls also score 16 out of 20. Well, let's not beat around the bush. Visually, this one is not the best. Textures are bad. Aliasing is really not great. Shadows also not very good, and when in motion, as you can see, the physics of your cape as you're moving around and some of those animations have been culled, clearly to increase performance, but it gives almost a stop frame look to some of those animations. Now, frame rate, you're looking at an attempt at 30 FPS, but you will see a lot of drops and stutters, chiefly when you're moving around the world as it struggles to load in environmental assets, and there are many times where you will literally see vases and other tertiary items materialize over the course of 3 to 5 seconds. Its one saving grace are that the cutscenes, it's clearly using higher detail character models. It can get away with a lower frame rate because it's more cinematic and you're not in control of it. And in these moments, which, to be fair, are very often, it looks okay. In handheld, we have a very similar experience. If you're not someone that's particularly triggered by low visual quality and okay-ish frame rates, you're going to be able to enjoy the game on Switch, but certainly I think it needs a little patchwork. It would be remiss of me to just say, yeah, this is fine. The audio, on the other hand, is the complete opposite picture. It sounds incredible.
有一天傍晚， 红儿在东市附近玩耍，发现了长安最高的那棵树。那是一棵……
There's a lovely soundtrack here, and the voice acting is excellent in the character's native tongue. I didn't have an issue reading the on-screen text. I do think it's a bit of a missed opportunity they didn't add in HD Rumble, or any for that matter, but still, I give visuals and performance 10 out of 20, sound and audio scores 18 out of 20. Xuan Yuan Sword 7 is going to set you back £34.99. There is a Play Asia physical coming, I believe. You can actually use our discount down in the description if you want to buy the physical version, and we do get a little kickback, so I'll say everyone's a winner. In terms of game length, you're looking about 15 hours, as I mentioned in the story section. That's 15 reasonably linear, but quite quality hours. If you want to find all of the little secret-y things, then more towards 25, and it's a 9.4GB download. Despite the visual issues, I've really enjoyed my time with it and have been surprised that I've never heard of it before. I know it released back in 2021 on other platforms. On Switch, I give value 14 out of 20. Despite a couple of things I didn't like, I've really enjoyed my time with Xuan Yuan Sword 7. They need to do some work visually, but I think if you pick this up and you're a fan of the action RPG genre, and you particularly like a strong story, this will appeal to you. Right now it gets a SwitchUp score of 74%. Thanks to the publisher for the review copy. Let me know down in the comments, is this one you've got your eye on? Those visuals, yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? If they looked a lot better, this would be definitely in the 80s. Thanks to our Patreons and members, all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!